always a difficult task to interview someone that you love and for whom friendship abounds, and a person that I feel I know so intimately. But what I'd hope to do in the course of the next few minutes together is explore some aspects of your own thought processes, and then your own creative processes, and then how those processes that come out of you manifest their destiny in a society, in a world. And I think the first notion that always strikes me as I'm with you is this magnificent way that you can view reality and then bring it into fantasy. How does this come about in your own thinking? Can you feel about the background of that process and explain it?
No, it's sort of like walking out at night and seeing meteors dropping in the sky suddenly, and you have to look very quickly, and sometimes look out of the corner of your eye instead of staring directly at a thing. I wrote a poem recently comparing the whole process to watching hummingbirds, which are very difficult things to watch. But hummingbirds and creativity are very much the same. This thing whips in and suspends itself in front of you and flaps its wings 1,000 times a second and then is gone. And if you miss that moment, you miss the chance then to be creative. And this goes on during all of your life. Well, the older you get, the more you pretend not to be catching those moments. And the more you pretend not to be catching them, the more of them you catch. I've learned just to be simply enthused, or to go with sudden inspirations. For instance, I had a short story in the latest Playboy called The Parrot Who Met Papa, about Hemingway. Well, I wrote that story, started 19 years ago. I was such a Hemingway enthusiast that the night his novella was published in Life magazine, The Old Man and the Sea, I went with friends down to the printing plant, Western Printing in L.A., at midnight, and got my first copy of Hemingway's book off the presses as it came out. This is the sort of enthusiasm one must have in one's own field. And driving home with this book clutched to my breast and Papa Hemingway in my arms, somehow in conversation I got the idea of a parrot who got to know Papa in this bar in Havana. And after Papa, this all came out later, I began the story that evening. But I didn't know where to go with it. And a few years later, of course, 7, 8 years later, Papa killed himself, which was horrible. And nothing came until about a year ago. And I was going through my files one afternoon when I heard this voice cry out to me, "Finish me. I know how to solve myself." And so I looked at that story and I said, oh yes. And I took the story out, and an hour later, it was finished with the ending that's on the Playboy story. Sometimes you have to wait for years for the hummingbird to come back. Other days, within half an hour after I put an idea down, I get the beginning, the middle, and the end. For instance, a friend of mine gave me a story which I'm now working on, which is a very simple one of what if we were movie producers and we go off to Spain and we hire the Spanish army to work for us on this picture. It's been done all the time. Producers go over, Mr. Bronson, other people have gone there, Nicholas Ray, and they hire the whole Spanish army for $1 a day for each man, Well, when it comes time and they finish the film, someone gets the idea, says, well, why don't we just stay here and keep paying the army? And take over the country. And they do. Yeah. And they fire Franco, and MGM moves in. It's a great kind. As soon as you say this, you and I could sit here in the next hour, and you say, and then what? Well, let me give you an idea, Ray. And then you'd give me an idea. Well, who do we make Chancellor of the Exchequer? Who do we put in as Franco? Do we get the ghost of Louis B. Mayer? And would he be a good man? Would he be better than Franco? Would it be worse?
Or W.C. Fields?
W.C. Fields, right, who would handle the wineries all throughout Spain. So that you begin to cast the thing, and you get your friends together, if you have convivial literary friends, and others too. And in an hour, all of a sudden, beginning, middle, and end shape themselves for you. Now, this is an extravagant idea here, which you could give to almost anyone, and they could have a lot of fun with it. But the smaller ideas, of course, you have to grab even more quickly because they're little teeny things. And you have to act within, I find that within half an hour after I get an idea, I act on it.
Ray, you've always talked about a concept of time and the future. There's another dimension in the things you write. That's the dimension of reality. The now reality versus what you're thinking about. You're able to somehow drift out of the reality of the now and move out and stay out in this unreality. Can you talk about that? Are you aware that you're actually doing this?
Well, you learn to always go with your enthusiasm and never believe for a moment that you're wrong. You may discover later you haven't done the thing correctly, but in the moment, you're always right. And so you want to run out to the very end of an idea as far as you can go with it, and let your enthusiasm instruct you. Now, I think one of the ways of staying open in all this is to fill yourself in as many directions, in as many art forms as possible. The trouble with a lot of people, let's say in the field of biochemistry or in the field of being a lawyer or a doctor, that they get so stuck in those various fields that they forget that all these other fields surround them. So what I've tried to do in my lifetime is educate myself in as many of the arts as possible, so that when I get an idea and it is played back into my intuitive self or whatever you call it, it has a lot of facets to play off of. It has my complete knowledge of all the comic strips of the world. It can go into that mulch and pluck out vulgar things and refine them and use them, I hope, in a witty way. It can go into my knowledge of science fiction itself. It can go into what I've picked up from the Italian Renaissance, bits and pieces out of a sculptor's life, for instance, can give you the metaphor you're looking for. I find that I cannot express myself until I find the large metaphor that I can hold in my head and hold in my hand that explains the whole thing, that so simplifies it that if you had to tell it to someone the next day, you would be able to tell it. For instance, the concept of going around at Houston and not being able to write about it until I got the metaphor of the theater. And once I hit on that, that explains everything at Cape Kennedy and everything at Houston. It's a giant rehearsal of history. And it's the first time that mankind has ever rehearsed a thing so intensely before it did it. We have small instances of this in history, where Columbus did some rehearsing before he went off and fell off the edge of the world. But in the case of rocket travel, you rehearse every day, day after day, for many years before you do the thing. Well, that's a great metaphor. And once you've heard it, it's hard to forget, because it's very clear. And it's also very true. If it weren't true, it wouldn't work, and my article would dive into obscurity.
Sure. So, Ray, I see two dimensions of you. The first is the dimension of your being able to seize on a fantasy and run with it. And the second dimension is that somehow you have inside of you the knowledge and the experience to play out that fantasy in every possible stage of one's intellectuality.
Right. Lots and lots of bad stuff should go into you. Lots and lots of good stuff. Lots and lots of excellent stuff. It's taken me 35 years to learn to write a decent poem. 30 of those years, it was all dreadful, simply dreadful. Mm-hmm. But I never gave up, and I kept shoving Dylan Thomas in one ear and Shakespeare in one eyeball and Sarah Teasdale and Ogden Nash and all kinds of crazy people. Mm-hmm. I didn't worry about taste. That's the thing that we must give up talking about and worrying about. This is one of the great stultifiers of creativity. When you begin to talk about taste, then you can destroy a man's career, because he should explore as far as possible in all these various fields, and going into the back of his mind, then be able to borrow from, well, history, archaeology. I'm not widely educated in anthropology, but I do know the works of Lauren Isley, for instance, and these have inspired me for 25 years. And when I get inspired, I write fan letters, and then I get directly in touch with that person. The sense of fun that I have in being alive and writing caused me to meet some very remarkable people. And if you'll excuse the name dropping, but 18 years ago, I wrote an article about the joy of writing. It's not supposed to be a popular word. You're not supposed to enjoy anything. And that's the other thing that's wrong with our total society. You should enjoy, or else you should kill yourself. It's just that simple. Just don't stay around and bore everyone to death. Kill yourself or enjoy what you're doing, or get the hell out and do something else. wrote this article.
That would solve the population problem,
would,
maybe,
wouldn't
very
it?
quickly. Yes,
And a lot of the bad people in the bad arts. But I wrote about my excitement, my enthusiasm, my gusto for writing in this article in The Nation. A week later, a letter came from Florence, Italy. On the back, in little spidery handwriting, it said, B. Berenson, Itate Saturnino Firenze. I turned to my wife and I said, my God, this couldn't be the Bernard Berenson writing to me. Opened the letter. It said, Dear Mr. Bradbury, this is the first fan letter I've written in 89 years.
Oh, my God, it's marvelous.
I'm writing you because you use the word joy, the word fun, the word enthusiasm in the midst of your work. Why don't people talk of this? Why don't people say they love to do things anymore? If you are ever in Italy, come see me. Signed, B. Berenson. Well, when I went to Italy, I went to see him. He became my second father. We wrote back and forth to each other for 5 years. In the middle of the 5-year period, he wrote to Maggie and myself and said, children, come home. I'm dying. I want to see you again before I die. So we had this fabulous relationship with a stranger far across the world who came into my life and saw me speak of joy and fun and elation, and we became friends. And we went to see him again before he died. Unfortunately, he lived several more years, and we had our last correspondence 2 days before he died. But we all react to people in their enthusiasm. When young people come up to me, and there is this vibration in their face of, you can judge them this way. Someone comes up and says, am I a writer? And I say, no. Someone else comes up and says, I'm a writer. I say, yes, you are. That's the difference in the way you express this thing, what shows in your eyes. And if you really want to do a thing, it sounds so dreadfully old-fashioned, but I think it can be done.
Yeah. Ray, talk about the various ways you sense fantasy. How do you express it? You talked about how you're a sprinter, that you love the short story. What about the various aspects of the craft of your writing, the ways that you express yourself? Why are you a poet today, for example? When do you go to write a play? What about the film? The short story, the novel, and then now I hear you're doing this panorama thing for exhibits.
I love to experiment with various ways of approaching the same truth. And every morning when I go to my typewriter, I word associate for the first 10 minutes. That's when all my poetry is written. And I will just write a line, and I don't know what the line means. And by the time I get to the second line, the poem begins to shape itself, if it's going to happen that morning. And by the end of 5 minutes, a poem has been written. And sometimes it's excellent, sometimes it's good. Sometimes I look and say, that's gibberish, it's nothing. And I don't throw it away, I put it aside. So I love to experiment with word association. And I think more people should do this in any field they're in. The actors are learning to do this. I'm sure it would apply in the field of medicine, experimenting with your thinking on the various pieces of data you've picked up over a year and you've allowed to accumulate, but you haven't had a chance to think about them because you haven't written them down. And that's very important for some people. I can't give answers. When I used to work at the studios, and on occasion a producer would say, what do you think of this, Ray? And I'd say, I don't know. He says, you don't know? You can't tell me what you think? I said, no. I have to write it so I can see it and see what I'm thinking. And I can't give it back to you. It has to go through my eyeballs and back out my fingertips. And so I love word association because all my most secret thoughts come to the surface. So I do word association with poetry. I do word association in the short story form. I start out with the simplest idea. For instance, the other day I was writing a story about a priest sitting in his confessional, waiting for someone to show up in a little drowsy church on a hot summer day. He smells chocolate through the confessional grill. And he waits and nothing happens on the other side. There's someone over there, and he realizes whoever is there is eating chocolate and not saying anything, you know. And finally, when the guy speaks, he says, you know, bless me, Father, I'm saying, well, what's the sin? This guy eats chocolate all the time and can't stop. And he's come to the priest, you know, and the priest, he's never had anything like this. And he said, well, you go to a psychiatrist. Well, I'm going along with the story, you see. I don't know where in hell it's going. But all of a sudden, I've been a chocolate junkie for years myself.
Chocoholic, yeah.
Chocoholic, yeah. And the priest hasn't had anyone to really confess and save for a long while. And a real relationship grows up between this fat man in the booth next to him and the priest who needs to save someone, you know. And he finds out toward the end of the story, this guy isn't even from his own diocese, and is Jewish on top of it. He shouldn't even be in the place, huh? But he needs help, and he won't go to a psychiatrist because he says they can't help him. And at the very end of the story, quite suddenly, the priest, you know, gets a little angry at him when he discovers he doesn't belong in the diocese. And he says, but Father, you've helped me, you know. You've helped me. I'm off it, you know. I've lost 40 pounds. You saved my life. And they both sit there and weep. And the father, because he hasn't helped anyone in years, and at long last. And at the end of the story, you see, this is all writing itself. The guy on the other end says, I'm leaving tomorrow for Europe. I'll be back in 10 years. But I'll bring you something blessed by the Pope when I come. 10 years go by. The priest is lounging in the confessional one night, late, ready to quit, and he smells the smell of chocolate again. And there's a voice whispers through the grill, thank you, Father. Your gift is in the poor box. He gets out, the man is gone, whoever it was. And waiting in the poor box with a ribbon around is a large chocolate bar. And he knows it's been brought from Rome, and that on a summer day at Castel Gandolfo, among 1,000 people lifting their hands to be blessed, this little chocolate bar is held up. And the priest looks at it, and it's not the host's, and it's not all of life, but it's so infinitely precious that he puts it away behind the altar, and once every month or so in his old age nibbles at it. Right? Where'd that all come from? Yeah, you just go with it. You know, you go, there's where the great stories come from. And I think it's a beautiful story. I didn't write it. Something in her wrote it.
Magic.
Yeah. So the word association, that kind of idea, anything that hits you, anything that makes you angry. I was angry at the Kennedy assassinations. I was angry when Dr. King was killed. I've had it with that kind of thinking you solve problems by destroying people. So I had to exercise and get that hairball out of myself. And when I saw the Lincoln robot laid out on the table at Disneyland, I looked and I said, my God, what if Booth ran in here and assassinated the Lincoln robot? Well, there's your story. There, you got the whole thing right there. And as soon as I thought that, I rushed to the typewriter and wrote a story about an assassin at Disneyland who kills Lincoln all over again, and gives me a chance then to come up and say, you son of a bitch, you know, and then get rid of my hairball in the story. Pass it on to other people that think he's sick a while.
So the notion of specifically creating a play or a poem or a short story or an essay isn't the issue at all. You just, as a form fits your particular concern of the moment, you ride with that. And
yeah, anything that hits me, it's like going out in a lightning storm, and whatever bolt hits you first is the one that kills you beautifully, and you accept being killed that way. And so if one day it looks like it's all poetry, that's the way I go. During this week I've worked on the play, part of a screenplay, my book of poetry, finished my novel on Halloween, and prepared myself to start another screenplay. But I just shift gears every other day, and that way I haven't been bored in 20 years, nor have I suffered any severe depressions for roughly 22 years. I can't remember a day. In years, I've been depressed because I have enough brains immediately to go do something. I don't care what it is. Get on my bicycle, walk, whatever I need, I do.
Ray, you talk about not being depressed, and I think one of the most fascinating aspects about your character, which I recall from the day we first came together over a very serious issue, was your optimism. The issue, as I recall, we came together on was the notion of smog and pollution in the Los Angeles basin. You recall we met one evening at your home and
on Rapid Transit.
On Rapid Transit. That was part of that whole issue. And the excitement to me was that at a time when everybody is saying gloom and doom, you're saying, let's get it on. There's so many beautiful things to do. And I see a tremendous optimism in the way that you approach these real issues of our time, fantasize on them, and then try to carry them through into the reality of the political arena, the social arena, etc. Can you explore your own approach about how, having once done this art form thing, you now see that transition into back into the real world, but bringing that fantasy to bear, the change of society.
Schweitzer, is always talking about example. And the more you live in the world, the more you find that by setting good examples, by being optimistic, you can get certain kinds of things done. Now, I went into Samuel Goldwyn Studios recently, and I told him I wanted a soundstage. It was kind of nervy of me. But I said, look, is your life very exciting right now? Are you bored at home? What do your children think of you? I said, wouldn't you like to go home tonight and tell your children that Ray Bradbury is going to come put on a play at your studio? And you're all going to be excited for a change? You're not going to make any money. We don't have any. But we're going to put on the best goddamn play we can put on. Now, this, to me, is positive action. You promise a thing, you act on it, you set an example, you may fail at it, but people give you all A's for trying. This is heard in the world, and other people then begin to experiment on their own. Whether it's in acting, whether it's in medicine, I don't care where it is. But you set the example, and you get a politician then, just one of them, to set a brave example. Speak up in an area where he hasn't spoken up in years. And then, for God's sake, let him know that you love him for doing that, or he won't do it again. Or in any other area among the polluters of the world. If you can go to big businessmen and say to them, you have children, right? You have sons, daughters in college, high school. Well, what do they think of daddy? Get through on that level, because it's a combination of the family within the big businesses that will make the big businessmen get a conscience and begin to do the things that we need to have done in society.
Yeah.
And there's where your example comes in.
It appears now, Ray, that it's just not enough to pin a bumper sticker slogan on your sweatshirt. We've got to move out into society. We've got to use every element of fantasy, of film, of the theater, of all the various wonderful ways in which you have so beautifully and eloquently expressed yourself. We've got to bring it into the consciousness of government, of business, of the people. It's not just enough to have a rally. It's only enough when we've brought about the change itself.
There has to be a change in the individual. Groups don't do much in this world. It's wonderful individuals acting creatively as units that can change the world. Wouldn't it be great if we had a society of true individuals, each acting at the top of their ability, each believing in the guff we think we've had ourselves for 2 centuries now, that we believe in the individual. Well, let's really believe in him and encourage him to act as a loner and go into small groups on occasion to get things done, because we do need each other. But using our own creative imagination as individuals is the thing that can change our society. Suddenly a man like Nader comes along from nowhere. Where was he 7 years ago? Who heard of him 5 years ago? Who would have dreamt that one man, not his group, no, one man has changed the face of the United States? Well, how about 2 more men? What if we had 4 more men in the country that spoke up as bravely as he? I, in my small way, like to look on myself as a shaker and mover on a local level. Try, anyway. Mm-hmm. When I got mad about the rapid transit situation, I formed a very small group and did a lot of screaming and yelling. At least got on some TV shows, went down to City Hall and called them idiots to their faces on occasion. So, but a lot of people don't do this, even. And it's long overdue.
Ray, when I see you and am with you and talk with you, I think of Harold Urey, my marvelous colleague at the university. His relationship, his excitement, his involvement in this space age is something really quite exciting. Particularly, I'm interested in his feeling and your feeling about travel to the moon and other planets. At a time when we feel our society is beset by real problems, the problems of pollution, of famine, of overpopulation, of arms control. We hear from elements in our society that say, let's abandon this frivolity of playing Buck Rogers in the space age. How do you feel about that?
Oh, a bit hysterical at times.
Yeah.
But people are accustomed to my overreacting on some of these things. No, I think they're mistaking where we have to go. I think they're putting a false emphasis on these things. I think space travel is the most important activity for us in the next 10,000, the next 10 million years. I think it's no use doing all the things that we've discussed here this evening on any level if we allow the whole thing to be destroyed because our imagination doesn't look ahead a billion years. And that's a huge leap. And I'm not a blind optimist about the world. I see very realistically we are in danger from the environment we live in, from ourselves, from all sorts of things within the universe, and that we must get off this world on a very practical level. I'm terrified of the future if we don't. And I believe the spaceship is the means whereby we take real responsibility toward this incredible gift of life that has been ours. I feel a religious responsibility toward the gift of life to see that it survives. And I think the space travel is the largest answer among all of the answers.
You almost envision it in a reverse panspermism, or as part of almost a panspermism of maintaining the maintenance of life in the universe through
right.
The ability
Well, as Kazantzakis puts it in the fabulous title of his most incredible book, The Saviors of God, God cries out to be saved. We must save him. We must save ourselves. We are it. He is us. It's all one. And if he's only alive in this part of the universe, for God's sakes, let's give him gigantic mouth-to-mouth breathing.
Ray, where are you going to go from here? You're a futurologist, and in terms of your own creative moods and expressions, where do you think you will be developing in the next, say, 5 years of the future of yourself?
Trying to find out what religious man is, why he has to relate himself to the universe the way that we do, and we think all these things have died out, and then they spring up again in crazy ways, in inspired ways. But again and again, the religious thing, you know, what is the universe? What are we doing here? It is miraculous. There isn't a day that the sense of awe doesn't overwhelm me, and a sense of beauty at having had a chance to live once. This is nothing fake or nothing made up. I don't like the words of most theologians. They embarrass me. But I think I have a very real sense of awe, which I intend to investigate as long as I'm around.
You remind me of another man, a man of whom I had great fondness and respect, and that was Paul Tillich. I think of maybe the title of your book should be The Courage to Be Ray Bradbury. Thank you, Ray, for
Thank you.
spending these moments with us.